what I tell them is, first of all, it's not rocket science. You talk about the Wealthy Barber. It's still great advice today. I mean, it's so simple, but the idea of paying yourself first, right? Take 10% of your take-home pay and set it aside.
Today on True Patriot Love, I'm lucky enough to have Tim Cestnick from our family office. Good morning, Tim. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So glad to be with you today.
Yeah. Now, Tim, I'm going to brag a little bit on your behalf because I know you're a humble guy, and we worked together years ago at one of the big three firms. We worked at Deloitte, and I got to tell you, Tim is one of the guys that I met early in my career, and I knew Tim was going to do great things in his career because of the focus this man has. So, and Tim, I was always, really admired all the focus you had. And right away, Tim knew from day one at Deloitte that he wanted to become involved in tax. He wanted to be part of his career would be a tax practitioner. I know he went on to work for another firm. He went on to work for some major banks, Bank of Nova Scotia, and started Wall Street family offices in the middle of his career and did great things. And Tim, when I was preparing for the show, I was taking a look at your resume and everything going on now. You're an FCPA, an FCA, a CPA, a TFP, and a TEP. TEP, I don't really know what it is, but if you could tell me. But
Trust and Estate Practitioner. It just means that I'm really boring because all I talk about and read about is all this financial stuff.
No, you're not boring, that's for sure. But I think that's a tribute to you because you kept learning, expanding your career, and growing. And for those of you who don't know a lot about accounting, in those days when I knew Tim, it was a very onerous set of exams that you had to go through to become a CA. You had to do School of Accountancy, and then you had to do 4 hours, 4 days to write your UFEs, your Uniform Final Exams. And Tim is one of those guys that you just knew he was going to go through it like lickety split, get on with it, and move on. So thanks for taking the time. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, because our family office is like a one-stop shopping network for family planning, is it not?
Yeah, so a family office, the concept of a family office has evolved over time, but really what it is, we are a wealth advisory firm that works with not very many families, about 45 families across the country, very successful families. We help them make wise decisions about their money, about their wealth. And that includes in a lot of areas. So we are licensed as investment managers. We also help with integrated planning, which is your tax planning, estate planning, ownership structuring, all of that. Risk management, which is asset protection planning and insurance planning, and strategic philanthropy, because a lot of families are generous and want to give money back. And there's a way to do that more meaningfully, but also to save tax at the same time. And then family continuity is an area of work that we delve into, which is really about making sure that if a family has enough money where it could go on for a couple of generations, that it actually will successfully do that, because it's not easy for that to happen. A lot of family dynamics can get in the way of that happening. So family continuity is about family governance. It's about education for the next generation, leadership mentoring, communication coaching. It's a bunch of things. So we do that. And then lastly, we do a lot of paper shuffling, which is the bill paying and the tax return preparation and the bookkeeping for holding companies and things like that. So that gives you an overview of things we do, but it's pretty broad.
Yeah, no, wow. That sounds really interesting, and a full stop shop, which it sounds like. So Tim, before the show, I was mentioning to you as we were getting ready, BMO just put out a survey, and 36% of Canadians are concerned they're not going to meet their retirement goals now. And they said, and this is interesting because I think it might be a little more, they said most Canadians think they need 1.7 million in the bank to retire. And now it gets higher. 1.9 if you live in the GTA, 2.2 million if you live in BC, less on the East Coast, significantly less. But, it's something on everyone's mind. And, I mentioned to you, I'm getting up there too. So I'm starting to think about it. And my my retirement planning goals and whether I met them or not. So I sat down and, before the show, I was crunching some numbers, and I quickly grabbed my old calculator from school and I started crunching some numbers, and I basically took a look and I said, if I need $60,000 a year and there's a 5% or let's say a 3% inflation, and I was going to live till 80, how much money would I need? And it came out to $1.6 million. I was like, wow, okay, so that did work. And, because there's a lot of arguments around, how much money you do need to retire, and whether or not you just have to look at your annual cash flow versus your net worth and all that good stuff. But, talk to me a little bit about, the stuff and the types of services, you would be thinking about when it comes to people planning for retirement right now.
So, first of all, I think the numbers you shared are not far off. First of all, I think a lot of people do get concerned they don't have enough to live in retirement. And that could be for a number of different reasons. It could be because the cost of living has gone up so much. And that's one reason. It could also be that maybe they just haven't been diligent enough about saving for the future. I mean, if you look at the biggest store of value for most Canadians, it would be in their real estate, in their homes, which many of us were fortunate enough to buy years ago when you could afford to buy a home in Canada. So, but those numbers aren't totally inaccurate. I think if you want to take a very simplified way of doing the math, really simplified, doesn't get simpler than this. But if you were to take your annual income that you will need on day one in retirement, let's say you're retiring this year, pick the income level that you would need this year to survive, multiply it by 30. 30 is just directionally correct. Now, it's so at your $60,000 number, multiply by 30, you come out to 1.8 million. So it's not actually too far off. To be really accurate, and a lot of people don't want to be accurate because they're worried about finding out the reality, but it makes sense to visit with a financial planner or somebody who can actually do the math more accurately and figure out based on what you spend and using inflation numbers and making assumptions about inflation and returns, what you really need. But that's a general ballpark. So it's a high number.
Yeah, it is a high number. And, here's the thing. We do a lot of shows now, Tim, where we're talking about real estate values and declining real estate values in this market. So, and people who are at the point where you mentioned they're either entering the market at an unsustainable, affordable level, or quite frankly, they're stuck in the market and they're watching their asset value decrease as the market realigns. So, we do. The interesting thing is, most people who go into retirement look at two main things, right? It's their real estate values, and then it's their stock values. It's their portfolio, stocks and bonds, right?
That's right.
And the interesting part that I find when you have the conversation, so I'll be at a dinner party and someone will sit down with me and say, well, you're a CPA. And I say, well, or a CA as you and I were called. I say, well, I wasn't a very good one. I'll be truthful with it. That's why I got out of it pretty quick and started other businesses. And so, but they say, yeah, but and I said, well, when it comes to real estate right now, unless you bought rental properties, you have to be really careful about what you're valuing your existing property at. And
that's
because as you see the market, and I went through this in the mortgage meltdown when I was living in Florida years ago. My real estate values dropped so fast and so radically that I could no longer depend on them for my mortgaging of my other business assets. So I learned the hard way on that one. So people really got to be careful now. And when you talk to your clients about real estate and retirement and investing, what is your focus right now?
Well, I think first of all, I actually don't like the word retirement. I think that, if you want to live a long, healthy life, I think you need a purpose. And it doesn't mean you need to work doing what you're doing every day for the rest of your life. But I do believe that there's life beyond, they call it the daily grind of what people are doing today. So whether that's starting a business, whether it's working part-time somewhere else, consulting in the field that you've been working in for most of your career, whatever it looks like. And I think for a lot of Canadians, that's something that many people are going to have to look to do, because for some people, it's going to be tough to make ends meet. Now, one thing I will say, it's never too late to accelerate how much you're setting aside, so that you have your assets working for you, not just your time working for you. And I think a diversified portfolio is pretty critical. When we invest money for families today, we are probably 50 to 65% in what we call non-traditional investments. Now, what does that include? Well, anything other than a publicly traded stock and bond. That's not to say stocks and bonds are not that there isn't a place for them. There absolutely is. But as you get older, what you don't want to see is a lot of swings in the value of your assets, your value of your portfolio. So things that get marked to market every day because they're publicly traded, you get a lot of volatility there. In certain other things like real estate, or private businesses, or funds that invest in private equity, or private debt, private mortgage strategies, these things, you have to be careful what you're investing in. You have to make sure that the people who you're entrusting your money to know what they're doing, and that they've got a solid track record, and they have a lot of skin in the game themselves. They're investing a lot of their own money. There's other factors to look at too, but when you can find really good managers that do those things that are a bit off the beaten path, that don't get mark to market every day, you'll avoid a lot of the ups and the downs, and you can enhance your returns at the same time. Keeping in mind, you have to watch for liquidity. Not everything is liquid, but there's an increasing number of what I'll call alternative strategies or non-traditional strategies, which are monthly liquid or quarterly liquid, which, if you're willing to tie up some of your money for some period of time, you should get paid for that. And you can get paid for that if you're choosing your investments carefully. It's not an easy thing to do, to pick the right investments. And if you're not sure how to do it, you want to find somebody who's capable of doing that. And you want to find somebody who's got a pretty big toolbox. They're not just investing in stocks and bonds. They're investing in other things. So some portion of your money, whether it's 40% or 50%, whatever it might be, is less volatile, but still solid returns, very good returns.
Yeah. No, great message. It's interesting. When you and I met each other years ago, there was a book. It was called The Wealthy Barber. And, we really spent a lot of time, it was a very popular bestseller. And it really talked about paying yourself first. That was the key thing, right? So make sure, every month you have money sweep into your retirement account. It showed you the power of compounding interest, and investing in diversified mutual funds, or as you're saying now, the world's changed a little. You have to be even more careful and diversify even your investment tools. So I get that.
Right.
And then importance of insurance, right? Making sure you have insurance. And then, of course, estate planning and wills. That was the whole part of the book. Talk to me a little bit, and this is interesting. Talk to me about insurance for a minute, and then I really want to go into some estate planning before we jump into a few other things.
So insurance gets a bad rap, I think, because some of the people that sell insurance are they're good salespeople and they're persistent, right? So, and sometimes when you're approached by somebody like that, these are people that can sell ice cubes to an Eskimo. That's how good they are usually. So insurance gets a bad rap because of the way it's sold quite often. No one wakes up in the morning saying, "Hey, I want to buy some insurance today." Usually it's someone trying to sell it to them. But the reality is, it's a pretty powerful tool for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can build investments up inside an insurance policy, similar to an RRSP or a TFSA, and it's tax sheltered. So that's first of all one big benefit. I'm talking about permanent insurance here, not term insurance. But permanent insurance, which includes whole life insurance or universal life insurance, allows you to build up this investment component. Secondly, when you pass away, it all pays out tax-free. So you can have this accumulation over time inside this policy, and then you'll never face tax on it. It'll pay out when the insured life passes away. So the next generation, who might be beneficiaries of the policy, would get all this money on a tax-free basis. And lastly, the other thing about insurance that is really great from a tax perspective is that if you have a corporation that owns this policy, Maybe you have a holding company, maybe you have an active operating business. If your corporation owns the insurance policy, when it gets paid out and the corporation is the beneficiary and receives the money, it creates something called a capital dividend account inside the company. And what this is valuable because what it does, it allows that amount of money that's in this capital dividend account to come out tax-free. So there's all kinds of creative planning we can do, especially for those who are business owners or have corporations, to significantly reduce taxes owing at the time of passing away using insurance. So sometimes you're paying something for an insurance premium today, but the taxes that will be saved when you're gone is an order of magnitude much, much bigger than that. So anyway, but I will say this, if you're going to buy insurance, the first thing you need to understand is why. What is the purpose? Many people who try to sell insurance will just say, hey, you should have some insurance. But if you really understand why you're buying the insurance, that leads to answers around how much, the right type of insurance, and can really make this idea a good one.
Yeah, no, great advice, Tim. And, I think you hit it right on the nail on the head at the beginning. Insurance got such a bad rap that I know my generation sort of went away from insurance. People say, oh, I don't want to deal with insurance reps anymore. But there is a really great planning strategies inside of insurance. So you should take a look at it. Wills. So, I had this discussion a few days ago. I had a friend of mine pass away, unfortunately, last year. And his wife has been having a heck of a time finding assets, finding bank accounts, finding investments, figuring out how to shut them down, put them into her name. Talk to us about wills and estate planning for a minute. I know they're two different things, but really want to, I keep telling all my friends, make sure you have an updated will. Make sure, you have a list of all your accounts, all your account numbers, all your passwords. Because, when I'm watching, and she's a good friend of ours, and she's over, she comes and she has a glass of wine. She's telling us these stories. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, like what a horrific challenge for her in a challenging time.
Yeah, estate planning and wills are related to each other for sure. Estate planning, at its very core, for the most part, is a collection of documents that are properly worded. And depending on your personal circumstances, one person's documents may look different than somebody else's. Now, there's a bit more to it than that. Estate planning can also include, say, making gifts to your kids today while you're alive, or transferring ownership of the cottage today while you're alive. So it can involve doing some things while you're alive to maybe minimize taxes or probate fees when you're gone. But by and large, estate planning is a collection of important documents, which would include primarily your will as the number one document, but also include powers of attorney. And there's a couple of those that you need to have. There's a power of attorney over personal care. Some provinces call it a healthcare directive, but it's basically what this document does is if you are incapacitated and you can't make decisions for yourself, it gives the authority to somebody else in your life to make decisions about your healthcare, whether you get moved into a retirement home or whether they pull the plug if that's an option, if you're in the hospital. Those kind of things are important. So that's one document. It's a healthcare directive or a power of attorney over personal care. The next one is a power of attorney over property or your financial affairs. And you need to sign that document. These documents, these powers of attorney, apply while you're alive, not while you're gone. But they're important. So if you can't make financial decisions for yourself because you're incapacitated or something, somebody else steps in and can make those decisions on your behalf. And so the person you name as your attorney in your power of attorney over property or your money may be someone different than the person you name as power of attorney over your personal care. I'm pretty good with finances, but I'm not as empathetic as my sisters. So my parents have named them as the ones that make the healthcare decisions. I'm just kidding. But, so those are the first documents. Your will, of course, steps in and takes over once you're gone. It dictates what should happen to what you've left behind. That can include your financial assets. It could include children, if you have minor children as well. What should be done with the minor children? Who's to be the guardian? And everyone's wills can be a little bit different. Some can be very simple. The simplest wills, if you happen to be married, would be to, when you die, leave everything to your spouse. Or if your spouse dies first, your spouse leaves everything to you. And then on the second spouse's death, you leave things, equally to your kids. Like that's the most basic, most common kind of will we see. But your affairs can be a lot more complicated than that. If you have a business or you own a corporation, then you need two wills, believe it or not, right? One to deal with your corporation, your business, and a separate one to deal with everything else you have. And we like to do that because we separate those things into different wills, because what that means is the will that deals with your private company shares or your business, that will doesn't actually have to go through the probate process, which will save you probate fees. The other will, which deals with everything else, which is all your, your personal effects and the residue, the rest of your estate, that will go through probate, and there will be probate fees depending on your province. In Ontario, for example, it's 1.5%. So that number can get big if the probate fees can get big if your estate's in the several million range. But your will and your powers of attorney are the most important document. There's one more important document I want to mention. People rarely ever prepare this, and that is a letter of wishes. So I wrote about this in the fall in the Globe and Mail, since I write a weekly personal finance column there. But in a letter of wishes, what it does is it's not a legally binding document like your will, but it will tell your executor, your heirs, they'll give them all kinds of really critical and important information. So for example, what about your digital assets? What are your passwords? Where do I find them? All your bank accounts, your investment accounts, what are the account numbers? What credit cards do you have? What are the account numbers? All of that stuff should be captured in a letter of wishes. But it's more than just that. It's more than just information. It can be a place where you express your intentions. So for example, if you don't leave everything equally to your kids, so you've got 3 children and you're treating one differently than the others, but you have a good reason for that. You want your family to understand that. You know what? Your wisest thing is to sit down while you're alive and have that conversation with them so they're not surprised when you're gone. But you should also spell that out in a letter of wishes, so it really explains what your thinking was, and that can lead to avoiding hard feelings and avoiding, quite frankly, estate battles and legal battles after you're gone. So a letter of wishes probably has about 10 different things it should include. It can also include, for example, directions to a guardian. If you have minor children who you pass away and someone else takes over care of your children, maybe you have some wishes for them. Maybe you have an idea as to what schools the kids should go to, what kind of sports and activities they should participate in. Those things can be left to that guardian in a letter of wishes. Or a trustee, you're leaving assets in trust for a family member, but you want to leave the trustees with a little more guidance and direction on what to do with the assets. That can be spelled in a letter of wishes. So it's a really important document. You don't need a lawyer to draft it. You can do it on your own. But you should understand what it should include. I'll refer you to the articles I wrote last in the fall. If you look up my name in the Globe and Mail and you look up letter of wishes, you'll see 2 articles on that topic. But there's some free information, or you can research it on your own. But I encourage everyone to prepare that kind of a document as well.
Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, I was actually, I'm going to be writing that down because I don't have a letter of wishes. So I thank you for that advice. I'm going to back up a little bit to younger people because, we talked a little bit about people and kind of more on from the parent side, but let's talk about, someone the age when you and I first met each other starting out. And I'm starting out and of course, most people in their 20s don't think about retirement. They're like, okay, I'm not really into retirement and not even thinking about RRSPs. And I made that mistake. I made that mistake in my 20s, quite frankly. I got going in my early 30s. I started making some decent money after, I left and I got going from becoming a CA and really enjoyed life. And then I woke up one morning. I said, I got to really get serious about this. And I called, which is funny. Tim and I worked with Eddie. Eddie actually runs an office at Dominion Securities. I called Eddie up, and I said, Eddie, I'm really sucking right now. I said, I wish I was doing better. I said, I need your help. And so he said, well, come on and see me. So I went down and saw him, and I sat down, and Eddie was always loved investing and finances and the stock market and everything. So I jumped on with him and I said, you manage my portfolio going forward. I'm going to meet with you and have lunch once a year. And you and I are going to figure out a direction and a strategy. I'm going to bug you a lot because I just like talking to you. And so we've been together ever since. And it's been a good marriage of friends, because quite frankly, we have different skill sets. And so important. I think the first advice that I give to people when I'm at dinner parties and they ask me about their kids and retirement, number one, make sure you pay yourself first. So make sure you put that money away, make sure that money gets swept out of that account, gets sent over to your investment advisor. And that was the kind of the best thing I ever did. I got going with Eddie, and quite frankly, every month that money, wasn't able to touch it, wasn't able to spend it, wasn't able to do anything. It came in and went out, right? It was gone. Mm. And so, because the power of compounding, and this, Tim, that you're a lot smarter at this than I am. Basically, the power of that compounding investment, the compounding interest on that investment, is really the key. And for those of you do the math, now you can even actually just go to AI and ask AI to tell you the answer, right? It's a little easier now, but go to AI and say, listen, I'm going to put $40 a day for the next 40 years. I'm going to put it away. And I want it'll make what the average stock market investment with dividends has made over the last 20 years. Give me the value. And the value is going to come out to $4 million-ish, right? It's going to come out to a way bigger number than you think. And you're going to be shocked. And so you say, I could never be a millionaire. So you won't be in that situation where you have people now who are saying 36% of Canadians saying they don't think they're going to meet their retirement objective, which is 1.7 million a year. And it sounds crazy, but $40 an hour is basically, depending on what your average hourly rate is taking the first hour of your earnings and putting it into an investment every day. It's paying yourself first. And that really is the psychology, it's the Wealthy Barber and all that. But it does work, and the sooner you get on that train, the better. But yeah, I guess, Tim, I'm rambling on a little bit. I really do believe in the theory. I tell my sons to do it. I try to get them to do it. I've tried to get them involved. I've got them an investment advisor. I sit down with them when I see them, when they do come home for dinner, I do talk to them. So, tell me a little bit, kids, what are you telling them right now?
So I've told my kids, first of all, you don't have to love this stuff. You don't have to be the one in the family that takes a real interest in your personal finances. But somebody in the family needs to. Somebody, doesn't mean you need to be an expert, but somebody has to take enough of an interest where if they're not the expert, then they're going to work with somebody who is an expert and take responsibility for it. So I've told my kids, and as it turns out, my kids are all financially inclined. I got a son who's a CPA and another one who's going to be a CFA, and my daughter did her business degree. So they're all, I did not encourage them to do this. They just kind of followed this path. But what I tell them is, first of all, it's not rocket science. You talk about the Wealthy Barber. It's still great advice today. I mean, it's so simple, but the idea of paying yourself first, right? Take 10% of your take-home pay and set it aside, and just invest it for your entire career. If you start young enough, it's going to be a massive number one day, more than you're going to need. If you wait longer, it's going to be harder to get there. You might have to set aside a little bit more than 10%, but set aside some every month. Pay yourself first. And then it's a matter of, quite frankly, and this is the biggest thing that Canadians struggle with, it's just not spending more than you're bringing in every month. Now, that may sound simple, but it may sound obvious, but it's amazing how many people don't get it right. So, because if you've got a bucket, it's full of water and there's a leak in the bottom, because what's going out is exceeding what's coming in every month, you're never going to catch up. Your debt's going to continue to spiral, and that's going to be a weight around your neck. So bottom line is get your spending under control, and then get your debt under control as well. Canadians are among the most indebted individuals globally. Our average level of debt today is 103%. Well, household debt is 103% of our GDP. So I was reading, I think it was reading on the weekend, that the national, not the government's debt, the individual debt of Canadians amounts to about $2.5 trillion today, which is massive. And that's basically spending the future, spending income from the future. And when that income is less certain, either because interest rates could be going up, or job security could be going down, or you name it, inflation's going up. When things become tighter, that's when debt starts to really harm people. So again, don't spend more than you're bringing in. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. It's simple but not easy. I think
No, you're so right. People budgeting, right? And you and I guess when people say to me, I can't find a career, I said, you know what? Go be an accountant for a while. And, I always laugh because I wasn't a great accountant. I think you knew that. It wasn't something believe it or not, I tell this story all the time. And I don't know if I've ever told Tim. I've told Eddie a million times. I'm sure he's sick of it. But I had another job. When I first started Deloitte, I didn't think I'd last that long. So I did keep a job at Canada Packers loading trucks at night. So I used to work during the day and then go load trucks at night. And when they actually gave me the summer off to write my UFI, I went and framed homes. Right. So I never studied for my UFI. I actually went and framed homes because they were paying me to write my UFI. And so I used the money and I double dipped in it. I never thought I'd be, but you know what? Thank goodness I got through and I took the time and I articled and finished, because it was a great training ground to teach me to budget. And so now, I have a family budget. I know I drive my wife crazy with it, but I sit down, I budget it out. I'm very good at kind of when I do start a business, which, that's something that I enjoy doing. I like new ideas and creating new companies. I do sit down and I create a business plan, and that business plan has a number of segments to it, including a budget. But it's that training ground and that discipline that helps you actually succeed and be able to invest in different businesses, and you reap the benefit of it when you see it actually come to fruition. So I totally agree with you on that. Hey, on the real estate side, if I'm a young person right now, and this is my advice to people right now, and I know I've said it to my son and the one that's at home right now. I said, listen, you got to start looking at rental homes or multi-dwelling homes more. So I'm kind of focusing on, when you get going, you might have the first floor to yourself, but if we build it for you, and I love building homes, when we build a couple of homes, you might actually live on the first floor, rent the top 2 floors out, and then from there you'll pay your mortgage off, and then you'll buy another one and another one. Yeah. And that's where I'll leave you. I don't want you to focus on single dwelling homes anymore, because they're unattainable for you right now.
It's a fantastic idea. Fantastic. So, I'm a business owner, so I own a business, but one of the assets I do own are a couple different multi-unit residential properties. I'm a big believer in the use of real estate. I know it's expensive today. I know that. But you know what? I believe that over time, young people should aspire still to try to own the home they live in. And if that means finding a home that is a duplex or has a basement apartment in it, where they can live upstairs or live in one unit and rent the other one out, that's going to make it a lot easier to afford it. And over time, you're going to build equity. With every payment, mortgage payment, you're going to build equity. I still believe that when it comes to financial security, owning real estate is still one of the best assets you can own. I'm not saying that that's all people should own, although some families that's exactly what they do. They load up on real estate because they've done it and they know it better than anything else, and they've done really well by it. It's just more difficult today, so you got to find those properties and those pockets of narrow neighborhoods where things are a little bit less expensive, maybe because the neighborhood is not as nice as the one across town or whatever. Buy a property that's you've heard the advice: buy the least expensive property on the street, probably because it needs the most work, and put some work into it and rent out part of it if you have to. But I still think building equity so you don't actually rent for the rest of your life is a very important financial strategy. And I wrote an article about this in the Globe and Mail a couple of weeks ago where I just talked about using the first home savings account. I talked about using the RRSPs and combining those two plans together to be able to buy a first home. Every Canadian who is 18 or older who has never owned a home or hasn't owned one in the last 5 years should have a first home savings account. It's kind of like an RSP on steroids because you don't pay tax when you take the money out if you buy a home with it. Your RSP, you can take money out under the on the home buyer's plan. You have to repay it over 15 years if you don't want to pay tax on the amount. So that's still fine. So you can pull out $60,000 when you buy a home from an RSP. Your first home savings account, if you're putting in the maximum $8,000 a year, will grow nicely over a period of years. So even if your goal is not to buy a house for 10 years, 12 years, maybe even 15 years, start saving now and look for that. And don't make your first home your last home. This is another thing I see. I see some young people say, well, I have to move into a home like the home my parents own, like the one I grew up in. No, you don't. You just need to own equity in a piece of real estate that's in a good location and that will appreciate over time. It doesn't have to be your last home. Find something you can afford. But I still think it's worthwhile pursuing.
Yeah, it's interesting. When after I left and went on to my next job after you and I worked together, I bought my first single dwelling home, which was interesting. And it was a family, 17 people lived in it. And I tell this story because my dad thought I was insane. I bought this home. I went in and I brought my father. And my dad had been renovating homes most of his life with his brothers, being Italian. They all had trades. And so we went in and he says, what the heck did you buy this for? And I said, to your point, I said, the bones are good. Location's so. And I said, I think I can gut this thing and get it back on its feet and get it out. And I can live in it for a while.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't too close. It wasn't too far away from where I was working. I said, so it's convenient. And he said, this is a mess. And so I did it. And from there I learned, and I now, when I deal with young people who come onto sites when I'm building a home now or homes, I say to them, you have much more information at your fingertips than I did, because I had to watch people in the trades to learn the trade. Now you can be a YouTube tradesperson with skilled trades. You can learn all these extra things just watching shows and YouTube and everything, and you can become, a pretty adept at any trade you want to become at just by watching. Whereas I used to have to stand beside a tradesperson and ask them questions. Half the times they didn't want to talk to me, and then you had to kind of apprentice a little bit to learn. Now you don't have that. So I always tell my sons, do the same thing, make sure you learn as much as you can to fix up your own homes. So,
absolutely.
Great advice.
Smart. Yeah, smart.
So RSP time. I just want to hit on this because I as we go. So, we're through it. Tax time's coming to an end, right? Thank goodness. It's always a relief after tax time finishes for everyone. And then I guess you're into corporate tax time next, but for the most part. But any advice on RSPs before we wrap up? That I always tell people, don't wait. Start now, especially younger people. And anything that you can provide on that front.
Sure. A couple of things I'll say. First of all, if you can contribute to both a tax-free savings account, a TFSA, and your RSP, that's the best thing to do. If you don't have the resources to do both, then when you're younger, you may actually be better off contributing to your TFSA than your RSP. And the reason is as you get older and maybe your income grows, not only can you put more into an RSP at that point in time, but the tax deduction you get for your RSP contribution, that's worth more when you're making more income. Okay. So if you can contribute to both, great. If you are contributing to an RSP, which is good if you can, take a look and ask yourself the question, is my income this year lower than it's going to be next year? Will I have significantly higher income next year? Maybe because I'll expect to have a new job or whatever. If that's the case, you might want to save your RSP deduction until next year. You can put the money in today. You're entitled to the tax deduction for the year, but you can defer that deduction to any year in the future. Now, I wouldn't push it off for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, but to push it off for, maybe a couple of years, 1 year for sure. If your income's going to be higher next year, not a bad idea to do that. The RSP can be used for buying a home, as we talked about, the home buyer's plan. It can also be used to go back to school if you want to upgrade your education, the lifelong learning plan. In other words, you can tap into the assets inside your plan for those purposes and not pay tax on the money, as long as you repay the money back to your RSP over time. So there's some flexibility with your RSP there. But between a TFSA and an RSP, they're actually equivalent in terms of how effective they are at saving for the future. The RSP comes with a little bit of a psychological advantage in the sense that if you put money into an RSP, you're not as likely to pull it out because you pay tax when you pull it out. With a TFSA, it's pretty easy to put money in and then pull it out again because there's no tax implications to it. So if you're not disciplined, the RSP still might be a better approach. But the bottom line is you should be saving for the future in one way or another. And those are the two primary vehicles, TFSA, RSP, and then don't forget the first home savings account if you haven't owned a home in the last 5 years.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate it. And, thanks for taking the time today. I know you're busy and you got lots going on right now, and I really appreciate it. And, in the future, I always read your articles, in the Globe, and I see on TV all the time. So, which I'm very proud and happy that, you're doing so well. And as you can tell from everyone who's watching this show today, Tim knows his stuff, so which is great. And thank you. And for those of you, we hope Tim will come back and join us on more shows, and as we roll out the year, and I'm sure more financial issues come about in these crazy times. So
for sure,
thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks.